South Africa, like many countries, have a rather turbulent history when it comes to human rights, and the vision to end human suffering continues for organizations like the Justice Desk, which partners with locals to know and use their rights practically. Now, Impact and Advocacy Manager from the organization, Edward Keenan Jacobs, joins us along with Dr. Laura Fisher from Boston City Campus to talk about how unemployment impacts our human rights. Good morning and welcome to you both. Welcome to your For Your Good Breakfast Show.
Thank you so much.
Happy Human Rights Day.
Thank you.
Look, I'm glad we are talking about this because we have to talk about it. It is such an incredibly important topic for, the people of South Africa. I'm going to jump straight into you with you, Edward. Our constitution continues to be, lauded as this great vision. There's talks, there's plans, we hear about these things happening, but we're failing to see real change on the ground. Why is that?
Yeah, so as you say, our constitution is widely lauded, and rightfully so, because we have a constitution that protects a wide ambit of rights, from the right to education, to the right to health, clean water, a safe environment. But there's a disjuncture between what we see on paper and what we see in reality. And it is our view that this is due to the actions and, I guess, inactions of multiple governments since 1994, because a constitution is simply a framework, right? It's an articulator of a social vision. It's an ensemble of values. It tells us where we want this country to be and go. But it has no agency in and of itself, right? We need policy, we need politicians, we need governance.
We need action.
Exactly, to bring that constitution alive. And many people say that the constitution is often the reason why South Africa is in a mess today, and I tend to disagree with that, because if you look at our constitutional values, even if you look at the sort of seminal constitutional judgments, like the Grootboom case, where the Constitutional Court essentially forced government to provide adequate housing to unhoused people. Also, where the Treatment Action Campaign case, where government was essentially forced to provide antiretrovirals to mothers to not transmit HIV and AIDS to their newborns. So what this tells us is that our constitution is there. It's not perfect, but it's, I think Dick Moseneke said there's no perfect constitutions, but ours is as good as it gets. So, and I tend to agree with that.
Now listen, we spoke about all these other issues: gender-based violence, xenophobia, access to sanitary needs as well, water, unemployment. What conversations do we need to have? And also, do these these plaguing points need to be addressed separately, or do you see them as the Justice Desk as a whole?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first. Definitely, we have to see them as together, because a core part of what human rights are is that they are indivisible and interdependent, right? So they rely on each other. And if you think about it, if we look at the right to health and the right to clean water, they are intrinsically linked, right? You cannot see them as separate. Right. The right to education and the right to food, you can't teach someone if they have an empty stomach. So these rights are
under one umbrella.
Exactly, they have to be under one umbrella, and we have to tackle them holistically in order to make strides. And you spoke about the sort of shifting conversation and what needs to shift in order for us to actually realize our human rights. And I've mentioned that we need to put pressure on our government. We need to ensure that our leaders are held accountable. But more importantly, we need to understand our human rights as everyday people.
I want to touch on what Graham said, saying that the theme, very slowly, consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future. Now, for you guys at the Justice Desk, how do you view this? What do you make of the theme?
I think it's quite an ambitious theme. I think it's a good theme. But I guess the theme presupposes that we already have a human rights culture in South Africa. And I think it's nascent at best. And organizations like Justice Desk Africa, we believe that in order to build a human rights culture, we need to empower the everyday person, ordinary people like you and me. Exactly. We need to ensure that we understand our human rights, so that we can go out there and not only understand them, but also hold those accountable who are not enforcing them and defending them. So a large part of what our view on this is, let's think about how can we start to build one? How can we start to actually construct a human rights culture that kids coming through, that we actually feel like, okay, that our right to water, our right to health, our right to education, these things are protected and that they are actually enforced by our authorities. So, yeah, that would be our view on this theme for this year.
That was very PC answer. That was great, man. Thank you so much for giving us.
What can I say?
Yeah, you're in the right part of... I'm sure you could say a lot, buddy. I'm sure you could say a lot.
I want to flip it around a little bit, because often when we talk about human rights, you know, we talk about the gender-based violence, like we've mentioned before as well, water, unemployment, you know, it's a lot of negative all the time. But what do you see in a positive space? What positive change do you see with regards to human rights currently? Where are we?
And go.
I think, to be honest, though, there are many green shoots. There are many positives. For example, our right to democracy and our right to political participation is fantastic. We had an election in 2019. We have one coming up next year. We have multiple municipal elections and a thriving opposition bloc. And it's not every country, every African country that can say that they have free and fair elections on a regular basis. Right. Our right to protest is also thriving and well, I'm sure.
We know that.
We had, we had the massive protest yesterday, and obviously, rightly or wrongly, we have different views on it. But we can all agree that the right to stand up when we are seeing things that are wrong is important, right? Yeah. And then also our freedom of speech. The fact that I can sit here and critique our government and without fear of being, you know, abused or anything is massive, especially on our continent.
We've come a long way.
Exactly. Sure, yeah. And those things are worth celebrating. And then I guess lastly, just freedom and equality before the law. It's not every country that can say a former president spent a few nights in jail. And although, you know, people can agree and disagree on that, but that is a massive thing. The fact that regardless of how powerful you are, regardless of how much money you have, that our law applies to all of us equally. And those are the core components of a successful democracy and a successful country. So many, many positives, but much more work to do.
Sure. Yeah.